8 hours. That was the number I could not fit inside my head. Not 8 minutes, which would have been strange enough. 8 hours every cycle. The human lay down and gave himself away. The first time I saw it, I called for a medic. I thought he was dying. His chest still rose, slow and even, but his eyes had rolled shut and his hands had fallen open against the deck plating. And when I said his name, he did not answer, and when I said it again, with my hand on his shoulder, he did not so much as turn his head toward the sound. Nothing I had ever met did that while it still lived. You have to understand what we are. The Vothra have never slept. Not once. Not in any record we keep. And we keep records that reach back 40,000 cycles. We rest the way water rests behind a dam. Part of the mind holds still, the rest stays awake, listening, watching the dark past the hull for the thing that watches back. A warden on deep rotation is never fully absent from herself. To go under completely, to let the whole self switch off with the eyes closed and the body limp, is a thing we have one word for, and that word also means the moment of dying. So I called the medic. Of course I did. Her name was Sethril, and she had served 11 years without a single full-off cycle, which on this ship made her ordinary. She knelt beside him. She ran the reader across his skull and down his spine and said nothing for a long moment, and I watched her jaw shift the way it did when a number came back wrong. Then she told me his cognitive band had dropped below anything she had a chart for, below sedation, below the readings we log for the wounded who do not wake. He's failing, I said. No, she said. He's doing this on purpose. Let me give you the rest of the numbers, because the numbers are the only honest way to say how far outside us he was. The Sethlin Vor had been in hostile space for 6 years and 140 cycles when the human came aboard. 9 of the original crew of 40 were still at their posts. That is not unusual for a long-haul warcraft. The dark wears you down in ways that do not bleed. Reaction times lengthen by a fraction each month, then a fraction more, and no warden ever feels it happening, because the part of you that would notice is the same part that is quietly going dull. We call the long slide the fraying command, does not use the word in official traffic. Everyone uses it anyway. Merrick Vos was the only human in the fleet, posted to a Vothra hull. Engineer liaison rank, no combat record we were permitted to read. He was smaller than us and slower on his feet, and his skin did not shift color under strain, which meant we could never quite tell what he was thinking, which unsettled the crew more than they admitted. He spoke plainly. He asked short questions. When Warden Officer Torov tested him in those first days with the clipped, circling talk officers used to find the soft place in a new arrival, Merrick answered each question with the least number of words it could hold, and then waited, and the waiting was worse for Torov than any argument would have been. I liked him, I will say that now, before the part where it stops being simple. I was the ship's biomonitor technician. My work was to watch 40 life signs scroll past in narrow columns and flag anything the pattern did not expect. So I was the one who saw his line go flat that first cycle, and I was the one who nearly emptied the med bay over it, and afterward, I was the one who could not stop reading the log, because here is the thing that kept me at the screen long after Sethril had gone back to her post. When he came out of it, he was better than when he went under. Not rested the way we mean rested. The shallow topping off we do between watches rebuilt. His reaction band came back sharper than it had read the cycle before. His error rate, which I tracked without him knowing, fell to almost nothing in the 4 hours after he woke. Whatever he did in those 8 hours, he was not losing himself in them. He was assembling himself. He caught me watching the columns once, near the end of that first week. He had just woken. He was drinking the bitter human stimulant they let him keep, and he looked at my screen, and then at me with those flat, unshifting eyes. "I'm off for 8 hours," he said. "Wake me if it gets bad?" Then he lay down on the deck of a warship, crossing the worst stretch of contested space in the sector, in full view of a crew that did not sleep and did not trust what it did not understand, and he closed his eyes and he was gone, limp, undefended. His life entirely in our hands, offered to us like it was nothing, like it was the most ordinary thing a person could do. I sat there with his flat line scrolling past in its narrow column, green and steady and impossible, and I did not know yet that Torov had been watching too. From across the deck with his color gone dark and still, I did not know that the officer had already decided what the sleeping meant, that he had a word for it, and the word was not trust. Torov came to me the next cycle while Merrick was under. He stood over my station and watched the columns scroll, and for a while he said nothing, which from him was the loudest thing he could do. Then he asked me to show him the human's line. I brought it up. The flat green band crawled across the screen, that same reading that meant dying in every chart we had ever written. Look at it, Torif said. He does that in our air, on our deck, while we hold the dark for him. I said Merrick had made his rest schedule known to the watch, that it was logged, that it was his right under liaison terms. His right, Torif let the word sit. His color had gone to the deep matte gray that older wardens wore when they had stopped performing anger and simply held it. A warden gives up sleep the day she takes the oath. We give it up so the crew beside us never has to wonder if we are with them. He lies down and he leaves. Every cycle he tells 40 of us that he does not care enough to stay. I want to be fair to Torov even now. He was not a cruel officer. He had held the third watch for 19 years without one full lapse, and the cost of that was written in his reaction logs if you knew how to read them, the slow lengthening no warden ever feels. He believed what he believed because his whole life had been built on it. To him the human was not strange. The human was an insult with a pulse. He does not belong on a Vothra hull, Torov said. He surrenders himself in front of the enemy and calls it rest. When it costs us, and it will, I wanted in your log that I said so first. Then he left and I went back to the narrow green line, and I did not have long to wonder whether he was right. The alarm came 4 hours into Merrick's cycle. I felt it before the board lit, the shift in the deck plates, the drive note dropping half a tone as the ship cut its burn to go quiet. Then the columns in front of me bloomed red down their whole length as 40 life signs spiked at once. A raider pack had found us in the debris field where we had gone dark to hide, 3 fast hulls closing from the blind quarter, and they were on us before the watch even called it. I have replayed the next span many times because it is the clearest picture I own of what the fraying does to us and what it does not do to them. The crew moved. Of course they moved. But they moved a half-beat late, all of them, the way a limb moves when it has been slept on, except we do not sleep, so it is not the limb. It is the whole of you gone slightly numb from years of never once being allowed to go fully still. Sethril called the wrong quarter first, and had to call it again. A gunner keyed his mount and hesitated over which threat to take. Torov held the deck and held it well, but even his orders came a fraction behind the moment they were needed, and a fraction is all the dark ever asks for. We were fraying in real time, and not one of us could feel it, and that is the horror of it. The ones losing are always the last to know. I turned to wake the human. He was already awake. I do not know what pulled him up. The drive note, maybe, or some animal part of him that the sleep did not switch off after all. He came off the deck in one motion, and his line on my board, the flat green band, jumped straight up into a reading I had never seen from him. High, clean, no ramp, no fog. He had gone from nothing to everything in the space of a breath. The crew was struggling up out of a slow fog that never fully lifted. He simply arrived, whole, at the top of himself. He did not run to a post. He stood in the center of the deck and looked at the whole board for the length of 2 heartbeats, and I watched him see it, all of it, the 3 hulls, the blind quarter, the way our fire was scattering, because 40 tired minds were each solving a different piece of the same problem. Cut the burn to 0, he said. Flat, quiet. All power to the aft screen. Let them close. Torov turned on him. That brings them into knife range. Yes, Merrick said, and said nothing else, because he had already turned to the drive housing he knew better than any of us. His hands moving before the argument was finished. We were losing. He had woken into a fight we were losing, and he was the only mind on the ship running at its full width, and he had just told us to pull the enemy closer. And I sat at my board with his impossible line burning steady at the top of the screen, and I could not yet see what he saw. And I did not know why the tired man who slept was the only one of us not afraid. What he saw was the debris field. We had gone dark inside it to hide, tucking the hull behind a slow-turning wreck the size of a district, and the raiders had followed us in, which meant all 3 of their hulls were threading the same broken ground we were. Fast ships. Fast ships need room. Merrick had spent 9 cycles crawling the Sethlon Vor's drive by hand, and he knew, the way none of us knew, exactly how much power the aft screen could hold, and exactly what the wreck field would do to anything moving quick through it without a clean lane. He cut our burn to nothing. We went still as the debris itself, and the raiders, closing hard on a target that had suddenly stopped, had to choose in half a second between overshooting us into the deep field, or cutting their own burn to match, and they were tired too, in the way all long hunting crews are tired, and they chose wrong. 2 of them cut hard. One clipped the turning wreck and lost a wing of hull to it. The other slewed sideways into the debris and was simply gone, folded into the wreckage before it could fire. The third came in clean, straight down our throat, exactly where Merrick had put the screen. Now, he said. The gunner had his mount already keyed. He fired at knife range against a hull with no room left to turn. Even a tired gunner does not miss. The raider came apart against our aft screen, and the screen held because every point of power we owned was sitting in it, because the human had put it there 4 seconds after opening his eyes. Then it was quiet, the kind of quiet that rings. I looked at my board. 40 life signs, still climbing down out of red. All of them ragged. All of them a half-beat slow, and one green line sitting calm and high at the top of the screen, the same line that an hour ago had read as a dying man. Merrick was already crouched at the drive housing, bringing our burn back up by hand, his back to the deck he had just saved. He did not turn around. He did not wait to be thanked. When Sethril asked him, her voice still thin, how he had known the field would do that, he said only, "It's what fast ships do when they're tired." Then he sealed the housing panel and stood and stretched his back the way he did, one hand flat against his spine, and I understood that to him the last 4 minutes had been ordinary work. The kind you do and then set down. Torev had not spoken since the kill. He stood where he had held the deck through the whole of it, and his color had gone somewhere I did not have a name for. Not the matte gray of held anger, something quieter and more unsettled. The color of a warden recalculating a thing he had been certain of for 19 years. He watched the human seal the panel. He watched him stretch. He watched him pick his way across the deck and lower himself back down to the plating in the same spot as before. "I'm going back under," Merrick said. "To no one. To all of us. 4 hours left on the cycle." He looked at Torev then, and only at Torev, and there was nothing sharp in it. "Wake me if it gets bad." And he closed his eyes and he was gone, limp, open-handed, undefended, in front of the officer who had called it surrender. 4 hours after the surrender had been the only thing that saved us. I sat at my board and watched his line drop back down into the flat green band, and I no longer read it as dying. I did not have a new word for it yet, but I had stopped believing the old one. Torev stood over the sleeping human for a long moment. Then he did something I had never once seen a Vothra officer do. He turned his back to the dark past the hull, the dark he had guarded for 19 years, and he faced inward, toward the deck, toward the man on the plating, and he took up a watch over him, guarding the sleep, holding the quarter the human could not hold for himself. He caught me seeing it. "Log it as normal rotation," he said. I did not log it as normal rotation. I flagged the whole engagement for review, the way procedure demanded after any kill, and I attached the biomonitor spread, all 40 lines and the one that did not match, and I sent it up the chain to the fleet station where such things are read by people who had never met Merrick Vos and never would. I did not think about it again. I should have, because 11 cycles later, a resupply order came down from that same station, routing us in, and buried in the traffic, addressed to me by name, was a request for the raw cognitive logs of the human liaison, flagged under a review board I had never heard of, carrying a header I did not recognize. 3 words in the old command script concerning the fraying. The station was called HFY Reach, and it had processed 40,000 wardens through its fitness boards without once passing a recommendation it had not planned to pass before the warden walked in. That is not cynicism, that is the number. I looked it up while we were still 3 cycles out, because the header on that request would not leave me alone. HFY Reach cleared or grounded every crew that rotated through it, and its clearance rate had held at exactly the same fraction for 200 years, which is not how living judgment behaves. Living judgment wavers. A number that never moves is not a judgment. It is a wall with a door painted on it. Merrick was summoned the cycle we docked, not the whole crew. Him, a liaison engineer with no combat record we were allowed to read, called alone before a duty board that did not review liaison staff, on a matter the order did not name. Torev saw the summons come through. He read it over my shoulder without asking, which he had started doing, and his color did the small, unsettled shift it had done since the debris field. "They're going to ground him," he said. "On what?" "On the thing you flagged." The sleepy was quiet a moment. "The thing I told you to log." The board sat 3 deep behind a curved table, and at its center was an assessor named Yuln, who had the smooth, unhurried manner of someone who has never once been surprised in a room she controlled. I was permitted to attend because the biomonitor logs were mine, and she wanted them entered by the hand that recorded them. I stood at the side. Merrick stood at the center, smaller than everyone in the room, hands loose, waiting in that way. He had Yule and did not accuse him of anything. That was the trap of her. She simply began describing a condition, episodic, total unconsciousness, she called it. Recurring involuntary cognitive absence. She read from a fitness code 200 years old, a code that did not once say the word human, because when it was written no human had ever stood in a Vothra room, and she read the clause that grounds any warden who loses full awareness on deployment and she let the clause do the work. She never said he is broken. She said the code is the code, and she said it kindly, and she moved to enter him as unfit for forward posting on medical grounds. Then she turned to me and asked me to confirm from my own logs that the human's cognitive band dropped below the sedation threshold every cycle. It does, I said, because it did. She nodded, satisfied, and reached to close the record. Ask her the other question, Merrick said. Flat. Quiet. First he had spoken since he entered. Yuln looked at him the way you look at a tool that is made as sound tools do not make. You may address the board when the board addresses you. You entered my low reading, Merrick said. Ask the technician what my band reads 4 hours after, and what yours reads. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. You have his logs. All of them. You read one line. The room went still in the particular way. A room goes still when everyone in it realizes at once that a second set of numbers exists. I did not wait to be told. I brought the full spread up on the board's own display. All 40 crew lines and Merricks laid over them. 6 years of it compressed into a single falling slope. The fraying drawn as a line. The slow, steady decline of 40 minds that never sleep. The decline no warden can feel because the part that would feel it is the part going dull. 40 lines sliding down and down across the deployment. Some faster, some slower. None of them rising ever. And one line that did not slide. Merrick's band dropped to the floor every cycle. Yes, the reading Yuln had entered. The flat line that read as death. And then it climbed. Every cycle it came back up past where it had started, and held, and the next cycle it dropped and climbed and held again. A sawtooth that stayed level across 6 years while every Vothra line on the display bent downward beneath it like grass under weight. Your wardens lose 4% of their reaction band a year, and never feel it go, Merrick said. To the whole board now, still flat, still small in the center of the room. I lose 100% of mine every night and get all of it back by morning. You call the first one fit and the second one broken. He paused. Just once, the code was written by people who'd never seen the second one. Yuln did not close the record. She sat looking at the two shapes on the display, the sliding lines in the level one, and her smooth, unhurried manner had nothing to hold on to, because the numbers were mine and they were entered and they could not be unentered. Behind her, the third board member, an old assessor who had said nothing the entire session, leaned forward and studied the level line for a long time. Where did you serve, he asked Merrick. Before this posting, your record is sealed. It's sealed, Merrick agreed, and said nothing more. The old assessor sat back. He looked at Yuln and then at the display, and then he said a thing that was not to anyone in the room, quiet, almost to himself. Send it to the long vigil board. He tapped the level line once with a gray finger. They've been asking for exactly this, and they don't know it. Yuln's color moved. The long vigil is not our jurisdiction. No, the old assessor said. It isn't anyone's anymore. That's the problem. He rose, which ended the session, and Merrick was cleared without another word, and I gathered my logs, still not understanding what I had just been part of. I asked Torov back aboard if he had ever heard of the long vigil. He had been a warden for 19 years, and he knew every fleet in the sector by name and posting, and he was quiet for a long moment before he answered, and when he did his voice had gone careful in a way I had not heard from him before. It's a fleet, he said. It went out before I took the oath. Deep Long Station, he stopped. It was supposed to rotate home 11 years ago, and it never asked to. He would not say more than that. Torov, who read over my shoulder without asking, who had started guarding a sleeping human's watch, went quiet on the long vigil the way you go quiet on a thing you were told once and hoped was wrong. So I let it sit. We took on supply and rotated out of it of Val Reach, and I told myself the summons had ended well, and for a while I believed the strange part was behind us. The strange part was not behind us. It was waiting one jump ahead, wearing a diplomat's colors. The order routed us to the Cassine border, to a joint operations summit I did not have clearance to understand, only to ferry a delegation and hold station while my betters decided things. The Cassine were an old power, older than the Vothra in space, and they did not sleep either. That mattered. I did not know yet how much it mattered. Their envoy was named Del-Ka, and Del-Ka had built an entire argument around a single fact before ever laying eyes on Merrick Voss. The summit was to decide a joint deep station operation, Vothra and Cassine crews sharing a forward posting far past any relief lane, the kind of deployment that eats years. Humanity had petitioned to send a liaison contingent. The Cassine had objected, and when the objection came to the floor, Del-Ka rose and did not argue strategy or tonnage or lane security. Del-Ka argued about sleep. Our peoples have held the dark for 40,000 years, Del-Ka said. And the envoy's voice filled the chamber the way water fills a low place, unhurried, certain. We hold it because we do not leave. Not for an hour, not for a breath. Every warden of every hull is present, always, to every other. That is the covenant of the long dark. The envoy turned, and found Merrick at the delegation's edge, and let the whole chamber follow the look. These allies you would bring us surrender themselves nightly. They lie down in the dark and they leave. I ask this floor a simple thing. On a deep station past all rescue, with the years grinding down, would you trust your life to a crewmate who is not there? It was well made. I will grant Delka that. It was the same blade Torov had swung on our own deck, sharpened now for a larger room. And it landed. The floor shifted. Even the Vothra delegation shifted, because it was our own covenant Delka was quoting back at us, and the envoy called for a vote of confidence on human inclusion. Right there, before the doubt could cool. Merrick did not rise to answer. He was not senior enough to hold the floor, and he knew it, and he stood at the edge with his hands loose and his flat eyes on the envoy and said nothing, which I had learned to read now, and which meant only that he was waiting for the right thing and had not yet been given it. He was given it from the back of the chamber. A Cassine rose, not from the envoy's delegation, from the observer benches, a battered old ship officer in the plain colors of a border patrol, the kind of posting that grinds a career down to bone. The chamber did not know the officer. Delcae clearly did, and clearly had not wanted to. I'll answer the envoy's question, the old Cassine said. I've earned it. Delcae moved to rule the observer out of order. The chair, curious now, let the officer speak. 9 years ago, my patrol took a hull breach past the relief lane, the Cassine said. 4 dead, drive gone, air going. We drifted 11 days waiting to die. On the 6th day, a human survey ship crossed our distress lane and stopped. The officer's voice did not perform any of it. One of their engineers came across in a suit and worked our drive for 2 days straight. On the 3rd day, my medic told him to rest before he killed himself with the work. Do you know what he did? The old Cassine looked, not at Delka, but at the whole floor. He lay down on our dying deck among strangers, another species, and he slept. 6 hours, full gone. He handed us his life without a word because the work needed him whole, and he trusted us to hold the dark while he got himself back. Then he woke and finished our drive, and we are alive. A pause. The envoy asks if I would trust my life to a crewmate who leaves. I have. He came back stronger than he left. My whole crew is proof, and we are only alive to be proof because he did. The old Cassine sat down. Delca's argument did not survive it, because the envoy had built the whole thing on a picture of sleep as abandonment, and the officer had just described the exact same act as the deepest trust a stranger had ever shown a dying crew, and it was the same act, the very same, only Delca had never once considered it could be read the other way. The vote of confidence carried. Human inclusion held. I watched Merrick through it. He never rose. He never spoke. When the old Cassine finished, Merrick gave the officer one small nod across the whole width of the chamber, the kind you give a thing settled long ago, and I realized the two of them knew each other, and had known each other for 9 years, and that Merrick had said nothing because he had known who was sitting in the observer benches the entire time. That night, back aboard, Torov found me at my station. The engineer who slept on the Cassine deck, he said, it was him, wasn't it? It was him. Torov was quiet. Then the summit traffic came through the relay. There was a rider on it, a flag. He set the readout down in front of me. Same board that pulled his logs at Ethavel, same header. Concerning the fraying, and beneath it now a second line that had not been there before in instruction, routing our next posting without any input from our own command, sending us not outward toward the front, but inward, deep, toward a fleet that had been told to come home 11 years ago and never asked to. They're not testing whether he's fit, Torov said quietly. They stopped asking that at Ithavel. Renault, they're testing whether the thing he does can be learned. They routed us to a research outpost first. I understood the shape of it later, though not then. Before you send a strange answer to a dying fleet, you send it to the people whose work is to break answers open and see what is really inside. The outpost was called Sethran Deep, and it existed to study one thing. The frame, not the ship's loss to it, the thing itself, the slow-going dull that no warden feels. They had been at it for 60 years, and they had mapped it in exhausting detail, and they had never once found a way to stop it, because there is no way to stop it, because the only way to stop it is a thing the Vothra cannot do. The station's whole science was the anatomy of a wound with no treatment, that does something to a place. Sethran Deep was very quiet and very clean, and the people in it had the particular stillness of researchers who have spent their careers proving that the floor will keep sinking. Dr. Savain ran it, and Dr. Savain did not believe in Merrick Voss. She said as much plainly the cycle we arrived. She had read the Ethavel logs. She thought they were an artifact, a reading error, a species mismatch in the instruments, a level line that only looked level, because we were measuring a human nervous system with tools built for Vothra 1s. She was not hostile about it. She was worse than hostile. She was certain, in the way of someone who has watched 60 years of hope walk into her station and leave as noise. Every fleet sends me a miracle, she told me, not unkindly, while her people wired the test chamber. A drug, a discipline, a mutation, a mystic. I've disproved 40 of them. Your human is the 41st. I don't blame him for it. I blame the people upstairs who need it to be true so badly they've stopped reading carefully. She had arranged a demonstration, not a review of my logs. She did not trust logs. She trusted her own chamber, and she had arranged for it to happen in front of an audience, because a delegation had come to Sethran Deep the same cycle we did. 3 observers from the board with the header, the ones deciding where Merrick went next, come to watch the artifact fail under proper conditions. The test was cruel in its cleanliness. Sylvain would run a controlled degradation trial, a standard tool of her science, a task load protocol that induced measurable fraying in a Vothra subject over a compressed span, days of decline forced into hours. She would run it on one of her own senior researchers, a volunteer, and she would run it on Merrick, side by side, same load, same hours, and she would show the delegation what she already knew, that under real pressure the human sawtooth would flatten into the same downward slope as everyone else's, that the level line was a measuring error and nothing more. Merrick agreed to it without a word. He asked one question first. Do I get my 8 hours? That's the point of the trial, Sylvain said. You get the same rest window as my researcher, 1 hour monitored. If your recovery is real, 1 hour of it should still read. If it only works when I can't watch it properly, then we both know what it is. Merrick considered this. 1 hour isn't enough, but run it. You'll see the shape either way. They ran it. For 9 hours, I watched 2 lines on Sylvain's chamber display, and for 9 hours Sylvain was right. The load ground them both down. The researcher's band bent into the slope I knew too well, the honest downward slide, and Merrick's band bent with it, because an hour is not 8 hours, because he had told her so, because a partial rest gives a partial return. His line sagged. The delegation watched it sag. Sylvain did not gloat, but something in her settled. The settling of a woman watching the 41st miracle become the 41st artifact on schedule. Then she let them rest. 1 hour. Monitored both subjects. And here is what her own chamber showed her. On her own instruments, in front of the 3 observers she had not invited to see this part, because she had not believed there would be a this part. The researcher rested the Vothra way, half present, holding still, never fully leaving. In 1 hour the researcher recovered almost nothing, a sliver. The slope stayed a slope. That was expected. That was 60 years of her science. Confirmed. Merrick slept. 1 hour, not 8. Far short of what he'd told her he needed, and his line came up anyway. Not all the way. He had promised it would not come all the way. But it rose against the load, a hard, clean climb where the Vothra line had only managed a sliver, and it rose in the one variable Sylvain could not wave off as instrument error, because she was not measuring his readings against ours now. She was measuring his recovery against his own collapse, on the same body, on the same tools, in the same hour. The mismatch excuse was gone, same instrument, same nervous system. Rest that worked beside rest that didn't. Sylvain stood at her display for a long time. The delegation was already talking among themselves, already deciding, but she did not seem to hear them. She was looking at the 2 rest curves, the sliver and the climb, and I watched 60 years of careful certainty try to find the error in her own chamber and fail to find it. An hour, she said finally, quietly to herself, or to Merrick, or to no one. You got that back in an hour? What do you get back in 8? Enough to not fray, Merrick said. Flat. He was already pulling the leads off his skin. That's all it is. It was never a miracle. You just can't do the one thing that makes it work. Sylvain did not answer him. She turned to her console instead and began, for the first time in 60 years, to model a fraying curve with a full rest cycle written into it. 8 hours, total absence, the impossible thing. Just to see what the line would do if a mind could actually leave and come back whole. I saw the curve resolve on her screen. I saw where it went, and I saw Sylvain go very still and reach up and quietly kill the display before the delegation could turn around and see it too. She did not say what the curve showed. She looked at me, and then at Merrick, and then at the 3 observers murmuring at the back of her chamber, and she made a choice I would not understand until much later. She chose to show them nothing. Take him where you're taking him, she said to the delegation, her voice even. Don't route it through my station again. She would not meet my eyes. Some numbers shouldn't travel until you know who's going to read them. What Sylvain saw on her screen, she sent to no one, but she could not unsee it, and neither, after that cycle, could I. Because before she killed the display, I had already read the shape of the curve, and I had already understood that the question had stopped being about Marek Vos at all. Here's the thing I had not let myself add up. 4% a year, that was the fraying rate. The slow loss no warden feels, the honest downward slope on every Vothra line I had ever monitored. 4% a year is survivable on a 6-year deployment. You rotate home before it matters. You come back dulled but whole, and you rest the longshore rest and the slope levels, and you go out again. The Covenant works because the Covenant assumes an end. Every warden gives up sleep for the length of a posting because the posting has a length. The long vigil had been out for 31 years. I did the arithmetic Sylvain's console had done, 4% a year compounding, on mines that had not touched shore rest in 3 decades. There is a point on that curve where a crew is no longer slow. There is a point past that where a crew is no longer reliably a crew, and there is a point past even that. And the long vigil was somewhere in the dark beyond all 40,000 wardens aboard a flagship fleet that had been ordered home 11 years ago and had answered every recall order with the same words. Logged and repeating in the traffic Toriv finally showed me, "We are holding. We will hold. Do not send relief into the line." They thought they were still guarding something. Command could no longer be certain there was anything left out there to guard, or that the fleet still understood what it was guarding against, or whether the thing giving those steady answers was a command staff, or the last frayed reflex of one. You cannot relieve a fleet that will not stand down. You cannot board 30,000 wardens who have spent 11 years certain that everyone approaching is the enemy, and you cannot leave them, because a Vothra flagship fleet at the far end of the fraying curve, armed, deteriorating, and no longer answering to reason, is the single most dangerous object in the sector, and it is drifting slowly back toward inhabited space along the line it was told to hold. This was the thing the header meant, concerning the fraying, not Marek's fitness, not a review board's paperwork. Command had been watching one human hold a level line across 6 years of the same dark that was killing everyone else, and Command had one dying fleet it could not reach, save, or destroy. And Command wanted to know one thing. Could the thing the human did be taught to a fleet that had forgotten how to stand down? Could sleep, real sleep, total absence, the surrender the Vothra had one word for, be given to 30,000 wardens too far gone to accept it? And if it could not be given, could a single crew that had learned to hold the dark for a sleeper hold it for a fleet? Toriv came to my station when I was still sitting with the arithmetic on my screen. He did not read over my shoulder this time. He had already done his own math, 19 years of it, and he stood there with his color gone to a gray I had only seen on him once before. In the summit chamber, when he learned the engineer on the Cassine deck had been Marek, my first posting, Toriv said. He had never once in all the cycles I had known him spoken of his first posting. Before the Sethlin Vor, before I made warden, he was quiet. It was a long station fleet, deep line. We were out 4 years and we started to fray, and I felt something was wrong with all of us, and I could not name it, because the part of me that could name it was the part going dull. Command pulled us home in the 5th year, barely in time. Half the crew never went out again. He looked at me, the officer who ordered our recall against the fleet master's protest against every warden aboard who swore we were fine. She said something in the log I have carried for 19 years. She said the ones losing are always the last to know. I had said those exact words myself that first cycle, watching Marek's line. I had not known where they came from. They came from Toriv. He had been saying them under his breath since before I was posted. The long vigil had no such officer, Toriv said. Nobody pulled them home, and now they will not come. He set both hands flat on my console, steadying something. That is where they're sending us. Renault with him, not to prove the human is fit. That's finished. They're sending one small crew that has learned to hold the dark for one sleeper, to a fleet of 30,000 who cannot stop holding it, to see if the thing can be taught before that fleet drifts close enough to be a decision nobody wants to make. He straightened. And the part I can't get past, he said. Quieter now. Is that 11 years ago I'd have agreed with the long vigil? I'd have sent back the same words. We are holding. Do not send relief. I'd have meant it. I'd have been certain. His color moved. I only stopped being certain because I watched a man lie down on my deck and trust me with his life every single night until I understood what I'd been calling weakness. He went to the viewport and looked out along the line, toward the deep dark where a fleet was holding a war that might have ended decades ago. Wake him, Toriv said. He should hear where we're going while he's whole enough to think about it. But I was already looking at my board, at the flat green line dropped to the floor steady in its narrow column. Merrick was under. 4 hours left on the cycle. And for the first time since I had known him, I found I did not want to wake him, because once he was awake, we would have to say the thing out loud, and once we said it out loud, we would have to go. We reached the long vigil at the edge of the 9th cycle, and the fleet did not answer our hail, and it did not answer our second hail, and on the third it answered with a targeting lock. 30,000 wardens, 200 hulls, holding a formation 11 years past any reason for it, arranged along a line no enemy had crossed in 3 decades, because there was no enemy left on the far side of it, only the dark, and the fleet's certainty that the dark was full. They had been given an order to hold. They were holding. It was the only thing left in them that still worked, and it worked perfectly, and it was pointed at us. Command's instruction was narrow, and it was cold. We were not to fight the long vigil. We could not. One warcraft against 200 hulls is not a battle. It is a decision about how to die. We were to make contact with the flag, deliver the human and what he knew, and attempt. The word in the order was attempt, which is the word command uses when it does not believe a thing can be done, to teach a dying fleet to stand down long enough to rest. Merrick stood at my station and read the whole shape of it on my board. The 200 hulls, the lock, the recall orders logged and refused. 11 years of we are holding. The same 4 words answering every plea from home. They're not going to let us dock, he said, flat. No, and they're not going to stop holding, because holding is the last thing they still know how to do. He was quiet a moment. You can't argue a frayed mind out of the one reflex it is left. I've watched it. You can't reason with the slope. High Warden Osk answered our request for boarding authority himself. He was the flag commander of the long vigil. 31 years on station, and he was the most frightening thing I have ever spoken to, because there was nothing wrong with him that you could point to. His voice was clear. His logic was clean. He was, by every measure my board could take, entirely present. And that was the horror of Osk, because a mind 31 years into the fraying should not have been able to hold a thought straight, and his were straight as rails, and every one of them ran to the same place. You've come to relieve us, Osk said. You'll turn back. The line holds until we are ordered to stand down. You have been ordered to stand down, Toriv said, 11 times by minds that cannot see the line from where they sit. Perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable. We hold, we have always held. That is the covenant. Osk had built his whole self around the covenant. Never leave, never sleep, never once be absent from the crew beside you, and 31 years of the dark had not broken that self. It had purified it, boiled him down until he was nothing but the covenant, holding a line for a war that had ended before I was born, and he could not stand down because standing down was the one thing his covenant did not contain a word for. Merrick asked for the floor. Osk allowed it because Osk allowed everything. Certainty does not fear a conversation. Show him the artifact, Merrick said to me, quietly. Not my logs, his, I understood. I pulled the long vigil's own telemetry, the fleet's public formation data. The readings any hull broadcast to hold station, 30 years of it, unclassified, freely given. I did not have their biomonitors. I did not need them. The formation itself was the biomonitor. I laid 31 years of the long vigil's own station keeping across my board, and I let the number speak the way numbers do. The fleet was drifting, not fast, 4% a year in formation discipline. A slope, the same honest downward slope on every Vothra line I had ever watched, drawn now across 200 hulls in 3 decades. Their formation had been perfect once. It was still holding, in the sense that a wall past its footings is still standing, but it had bent. Year over year, the line had crept, each hull correcting a fraction late, each correction a fraction wide. 30 years of a fleet that could not feel itself going dull because the part that would feel it was the part gone dull, and the line they were holding so faithfully, the sacred line, was no longer where they had been told to hold it. It had drifted. It was drifting still. It was drifting slowly toward home. That's your line, High Warden, Merrick said. Flat. No cruelty in it at all. You've held it for 31 years, and it's moved the whole time, and not one of you felt it move. You're not guarding the border anymore. You haven't been for years. You're carrying it inward. A pause. The ones losing are always the last to know. Osk looked at his own fleet's numbers for a long time. And the terrible thing, the thing I will not forget, is that he could not see it. The proof was his own data, freely given, laid plain, and 31 years past the far edge of the curve. He looked at a slope any first-cycle technician would read in a glance, and his clean, clear, ruined mind slid right off it. He could hold a thought straight. He could no longer hold that thought, because that thought required him to doubt the covenant, and the covenant was the last of him. The formation holds, Osk said. Calm, certain, final. You will turn back, or the fleet will fire. We hold the line. He closed the channel. Toriv looked at me and then at Merrick. And the setback was total, and it was silent, and it filled the whole deck. We had brought the truth to a mind that could no longer receive truth. The one weapon we had, the proof, was useless against the exact damage it described. You cannot show the slope to the slope. Merrick stood very still, looking at the drifted line on my board. The fleet carrying its own border slowly home. "Oz can't learn it," he said at last. "Quiet, he's too far in. None of the command staff can. They're the oldest minds out here, they've been holding longest, they're the most gone." He turned to Torev. "But a fleet isn't its command, it's 30,000 crew, and some of those crew came aboard recently. Rotated in young lines, not 31 years deep." He looked back at the board. "I don't have to teach the fleet to stand down, I can't. I have to find the least frayed hull in that formation, and teach one crew to sleep, and hold the dark for them while they do it, and let them wake up whole enough to see the slope Osk can't." "To what end?" Torev said. "One crew against a flag that will fire on anyone who breaks formation." "To one hull that isn't drifting," Marek said. "One line on your board that stops sliding and starts holding true. Osk can't see a slope." He almost smiled. He did not. "Let's see if he can see the one thing in his fleet that suddenly isn't bending. Find me the youngest crew out there, Reno. Find me the hull that's fraying slowest." And I turned to my board, 30,000 lives in their narrow columns, all of them sliding, and I began to look for the one that was falling slowest of all, the one crew we might reach before the whole fleet, holding its ruined line, fired on the only ship that had come to save it. I found her at the trailing edge of the formation, a supply hull, low-armed, unglamorous, the kind of posting that draws the newest crew, and her formation line, when I pulled it out from the 200 others, fell slower than any hull in the fleet. Not level, nothing out here was level. But slower, a crew rotated in only 4 years ago, young lines, the least gone minds in a fleet of the gone. Her name in the registry was the Ashfell, and her commander answered our narrow-beam hail on the second try, which told me everything, because a hull 4 years into the fraying still answers on the second try. Her commander was named Vesa, and she was afraid, and being afraid was the most hopeful thing I had seen since we crossed into that formation. Fear means a mind still updating. Osk had no fear left. Vesa had nothing but, "Something's wrong with us," she said before Merrick could speak low, so her own bridge would not hear. "With all of us, the whole fleet. I've felt it for a year, and I can't. Every time I try to hold the thought, it goes soft. My crew won't hear it. The High Warden won't hear it. I'm starting to not hear it myself." Her color was bad. "You have to say it fast. Whatever you came to say it before I lose the shape of the question." So Merrick said it fast, and he said it flat, and it was the most words I had ever heard him put in a row. "Your fleet is fraying and it can't feel it, and neither can you. Much longer. There's one thing that stops it, and your people can't do it, and mine can. I need one crew to try. You lie down, all of you, in shifts, and you go completely under, not rest, gone, the way you'd fear to, and while you're gone, we hold the dark for you. My ship, every gun. We guard your sleeping hull with our lives until you wake. 8 hours, then you'll be whole enough to see what I can't make Osk see, and you'll hold your line true while the rest of the fleet keeps drifting, and Osk will finally have something on his board he can't slide off of. One hull that stopped bending." He paused once. "It's the deepest trust my kind knows how to give. I'm asking you to give it to a species that met you an hour ago." Vesa understood what she was being asked. That was the miracle of her. 4 years unfrayed, she could still understand a hard thing, to go fully under all of them. In the middle of an armed and paranoid fleet, defended only by a single foreign warcraft. It was every terror the Covenant had ever named. Surrender in the open, the self switched off, the crew undefended. It was the exact thing that read as death. If Osk sees an Ashfell crew go dark on his board, Vesa said, he'll read it as us dying, or defecting. He'll fire on us himself. "He might," Marek said. He did not soften it. "That's the dark we're asking you to trust us to hold, not the enemy outside." Osk Vesa was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the only question that mattered, and she asked it of Torev, not Marek Vothra, to Vothra, one warden asking another. The thing no human could answer for her. "You've done this, held the dark for a sleeper. You've watched one of them go all the way under and trusted it wasn't death." 6 years, Torev said. "Every cycle." And the first time, Vesa said, "The very first time you watched him go. What did you feel?" Torev did not perform the answer. He had learned that from Marek, I think over 6 years. "I thought he was insulting me," Torev said. "I thought lying down defenseless in front of me was contempt, that he didn't care enough to stay awake and guard himself. Guard us. I called it the opposite of the Covenant." His color moved. That unsettled shift, I had watched change him cycle by cycle. It took me too long to understand I had it exactly backward. He wasn't leaving us undefended. He was handing us the one thing you cannot fake and cannot take back. His whole life, switched off in our hands every night, on faith that we'd hold. That's not the opposite of the Covenant, Commander. It's the Covenant taken all the way down. It's what never leave the crew looks like when you trust the crew enough to actually leave. He paused. I guarded him because he made it so I couldn't do anything else. You'll do the same for your people, and we'll guard all of you. Vesa closed her eyes, Avothra, closing her eyes on purpose, deciding. First shift is 10, she said. I'll take it myself. If I'm going to ask my crew to die on faith, I'll do it first. And so we came alongside the HFY, one warcraft against 200 hulls, and we powered every gun we had and turned them outward, all of them, away from the sleeping supply hull and toward the fleet that might at any moment read a darkened crew as a betrayal and open fire. And inside the HFY, 10 wardens who had never in their lives been fully absent from themselves lay down on their deck in the middle of a fleet that had forgotten how to stop, and one by one, terrified, they let themselves go under. I watched their lines on my board, 10 green bands dropping toward the floor, toward the flat line that had made me call a medic on the first cycle I ever met. Merrick Voss, 10 Vothra minds surrendering the self for the first time in their lives. Going gone, going undefended, trusting the dark to us. And across the formation, on the flag, I saw High Warden Osk's board light as 10 lines on one of his hulls dropped toward death all at once, and I saw the long vigil's guns begin slowly to turn. I want to tell this part slowly, because it happened slowly and because the slowness was the whole of it. We had spent the entire run toward the long vigil learning that you cannot argue with the slope, cannot reason with a frayed mind, cannot show the proof to the thing the proof describes. Everything now depended on a different kind of proof, one that did not ask Osk to think, only to see. Osk's guns turned. 200 hulls coming slowly around toward the HFY, toward 10 wardens gone dark on their decks, and toward us, alongside her. Every gun we owned pointed outward at a fleet that outnumbered us 100 to 1. Merrick did not raise our shields past the aft screen. He would not turn a single gun inward toward the sleeping hull. If we flinch, he said, flat, watching the formation come around. She reads it as us defending against them. It has to be total. We guard outward. We never once point a weapon at the people we're holding the dark for. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. He keyed the open channel to the flag so the whole fleet could hear. High Warden, 10 of your crew are asleep, not dead, not defecting, asleep. My ship is holding the dark for them, and we will not fire on your fleet, and we will not let your fleet fire on them. Watch the HFY's line, that's all. Just watch it. The HFY has gone dark, Osk answered, calm, certain, terrible. 10 wardens absent from the Covenant. That is a breach. The line does not tolerate a breach. The guns kept turning. Stand off, or we remove the breach. Watch her line, Merrick said again. Only that. And we held. I have tried many times to describe the 8 hours we held the dark for the HFY, and I have never found the shape of it because almost nothing happened, and the almost nothing was unbearable. 200 hulls held a firing solution on us for 8 hours and did not fire, because Osk's ruined mind could not quite resolve whether we were enemy or relief. And a frayed fleet defaults to holding, and holding was the one thing keeping us alive. We sat in the gap between 200 guns and 10 sleeping wardens, and we did not move and we did not fire. And Torv walked the deck the whole time with his color the steady matte gray of a warden on a watch that matters, guarding asleep, exactly as he had learned to do on our own deck. Only now the sleeper was 10 strangers and the enemy was the warden's own fleet. Merrick slept through 4 of those hours. I want that recorded because I did not understand it at the time, and I understand it completely now. 200 guns pointed at us, and at the midpoint of the crisis, Merrick looked at the board and saw that nothing would change for 4 hours, and he lay down on our deck in front of Torv and me and the whole crisis, and he said, "Wake me when her line starts to come up," and he went under. Total. Gone. In the tightest moment of his life, he handed us his whole self and trusted us to hold the dark. Because that was the thing itself. That was what he had come 31 years of fraying to teach, not a technique, the trust. He could not ask the HFY to do a thing he would not do beside them. So he slept in the crossfire, and we guarded him, and his flat green line dropped to the floor while 200 guns waited. Then, at the 7th hour, Vesa's line began to climb. I called it before Merrick was even fully up. She had told me first shift was 10, herself among them, and hers was the first to move. It rose off the floor the way his always did. No ramp, no fog, a clean hard climb, and one by one the other 9 climbed after her. 10 Vothra minds coming back up out of total absence, not dulled, not diminished, but whole. Whole in a way no warden in that fleet had been in 31 years. because they had done the impossible thing. They had left all the way and come back, and the leaving is what lets you come back, and their formation line stopped sliding. I put it on my board the way I had put the drift in front of Osk, but reversed now, live. 200 hulls bending slowly inward along their 31-year slope, and one hull, the HFY, holding true, not drifting, not bending. Her station-keeping snapped to the exact assigned line and stayed there, sharp and clean, because her crew could feel the dark now, could feel their own position, could hold a thought straight for the first time in years. One line, level, among 200 that sagged. "High Warden," Merrick said, quiet, awake. "Now look." And Osk looked, and this time, this is the thing. I crossed the whole fleet to see. This time he could not slide off it, because it was not a slope. A slope, his ruined mind could refuse. A slope is an argument, and arguments require the thinking he had lost. But this was not an argument. This was one hull holding true beside 200 that bent, and even a mind 31 years gone can see a straight line next to a crooked one. It does not require thought, it requires only eyes. Merrick had known that. He had stopped trying to make Osk understand the fraying, and simply built out of 10 sleeping wardens. One thing on Osk's board that a frayed mind could not unsee. Proof shaped so simply it needed no working mind to read it. The guns stopped turning, the HFY, Osk said, and for the first time his clear, clean, terrible voice was not certain. The HFY holds true. The rest of the formation is. He stopped. I watched 31 years try to complete the sentence and reach at last the edge of the thing. The rest of the formation is not where I put it. No, Merrick said. It hasn't been for years, but you can see it now, because you've got one line that isn't lying. Flat, gentle. Vessa's crew can hold your fleet steady while your other hulls sleep, one at a time, guarded the way we held hers. It takes a long time. It's going to take longer than the war did. A pause. But you don't have to stand down, High Warden. You never had to stand down. You just have to let your crews rest, one hull at a time, until enough of them can see the line to hold it true. You can keep holding. You'll just be able to feel where the line actually is. And High Warden Osk, flag commander of the Long Vigil, 31 years absent from himself and never once knowing it, looked at one straight line among 200 crooked ones, and gave the order to power down his guns, not to stand down. Merrick had been right about that, right about the one word the Covenant did not contain. Osk could not stand down, but he could let one crew sleep while another held the dark for them. He could hold the line and rest it, both, the way he had never once conceived a line could be both held and rested one hull at a time, Osk said, slowly, testing the shape of a thought his mind had refused for 3 decades. Guarded. One hull at a time, Merrick said. We'll hold the dark for the first 10, then the ones you've rested hold it for the next. And so on, until it's the whole fleet. He was already turning to me, to the board, to 30,000 lines that had only ever slid downward and might now, hull by sleeping hull, begin to climb. It works, High Warden. It was never a weakness. You just could never afford to find that out until someone came who could show you while you watched. In the weeks that followed, the Long Vigil learned to sleep. It did not happen the way a story wants it to happen. All at once, a fleet waking whole in a single triumphant hour. It happened the way real things happen. Slowly. One hull at a time. 10 wardens going under, while another crew held the dark, and our ship held it with them. And then those 10 rising whole and taking up the watch so the next 10 could go, and the next a chain of trust-threaded hull to hull across 200 ships and 30,000 lives. It took longer than the war the fleet had been holding against. Merrick had said it would. He had not been wrong about anything that mattered, and he did not remind anyone of that, which was the whole of him. I watched the formation on my board through all of it, the 200 lines that had only ever slid, and I watched them, hull by rested hull, stop sliding, then slower begin to climb. Not all the way, never all the way, 31 years does not give itself back, but climb out of the dark they had been drifting in toward something a crew could live inside again. Vessa took the HFY home first when it was over. She had asked to be the last to leave, and command had made her the first instead, because someone had to carry the account back and command wanted it carried by the warden, who had gone under before she asked her crew to. I never spoke to her again after we parted. I did not need to. Her line on the last board I ever read her from was level and clean and held true, and I have kept a copy of it. The way you keep a thing that proved something you were not sure could be proved. Ox did not come home. He stood down his guns, but he would not stand down his post, and no one made him. Because a mind 31 years frayed does not fully return no matter how it rests, and the Long Vigil was the only self he had left. They gave him a small station at the head of the reformed line, and he holds it still, the last of the fleet that never asked to come home, guarding a border that no longer drifts because the crews behind him can feel where it is. He sleeps now, one hull at a time, guarded. He learned the one word his covenant had never held. I'm told he is quiet and clear and mostly present, and that he asks sometimes to see the Ashfell's old line, the straight one, the one he could not slide off of, and that no one has ever told him no. Torriv made Warden commander. He did not want it. He took it because the fleet needed officers who had watched the thing work from the inside, and there were not many of us, and he had guarded a sleeping human every cycle for 6 years before it was doctrine, before it had a name, before anyone above him thought it was anything but one strange man's death wish. He does not talk about the long vigil. He talks, once in a while, about his first posting, the fleet that was pulled home barely in time, and the officer who ordered the recall against every certain voice aboard. He says her words less now. I think he finally believes them enough to stop needing to say them out loud. Merrick went back to being an engineer. That is the part I find hardest to explain to people who were not there. He saved a fleet of 30,000 and reversed a thing 60 years of the best minds at Sethran Deep had called irreversible, and rewrote a covenant, 40,000 years old. And then he asked for his old post back on the Sethlan Vor, and he lay down on our deck that first cycle home and said, I'm off for 8 hours, wake me if it gets bad. And he went under, limp and open-handed and undefended, exactly as he had the first time I ever saw him, and reached for a medic. Nothing about him had changed. That was the thing. It had never been a weakness he overcame or a power he grew into. It was only ever a thing he did, every night, trusting us to hold the dark, and the largest fleet in the sector had frayed and nearly died for want of the one small ordinary act he performed without once thinking it was brave. I read his line that night, the flat green band dropping to the floor, and I did not call it dying, and I did not call it surrender, and I did not anymore lack a word for it. The word was trust. It had always been trust. We simply had no way to see it until a man lay down in front of us and made us hold his life until morning. 6 months after the long vigil, a directive came down through Fleet Command, entered into the standing doctrine of every Vothra hull, replacing a clause 200 years old. I keep a copy of that one too. It does not mention Marek Voss. It does not mention the Ashfell, or Osk, or the 30,000. It is written in the flat language of all official things, and it changes only a single requirement of deep station service. And it reads, in full, all long deployment crews will observe guarded full rest rotation. No warden holds the dark alone. No warden holds it forever. Beneath it, someone had added one line by hand, unofficial, off the record, the kind of thing that is never supposed to make it into a standing directive, and somehow always does. Wake me if it gets bad.